the last of season 2, and I'm really excited to have Austin Rohr from Northwest RiverPartners here today to talk about hydropower. Because I know that we're curious. We're really spoiled here with all of our great hydro generation, but I'm curious what is going on in the Pacific Northwest and in the West in general in terms of how we're getting the energy, how we're transitioning to more renewable energy, and other questions you might have about our region and power. Let's dive in. Hey, Austin.
Hey, good afternoon. How's it
Can you hear
going
me
today?
okay?
Yes, I think we've got everything figured
Going
out.
really well.
Yep,
This is how live stream goes. You have to have some hiccups. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be on and happy to answer some pretty interesting questions from all of your audience over there in Chelan.
Yeah, we even have some spicy questions that came in. For folks who are listening live, they can type their comments into that section. We can see those, and you can answer those questions as we go along. I also have some that came in before, but first, can you give me like a little spiel about what Northwest Partners is or does?
That is an excellent question and something that in the 3.5 years that I've been here, I'm still trying to find the right elevator pitch for because we, in a sense, do so much. But to sum it up, we are a hydropower advocacy organization here in the Pacific Northwest. We are considered a nonprofit, but fall more under the umbrella of, say, like an NGO, so a non governmental organization, and we represent the interests of PUDs, particularly. We've got some ports and some businesses as well, but the bulk of our membership is public power, and that's who supports us and helps us get the job done. And in return, we advocate for the hydropower that they rely on to supply to all their customers. So, in a lot of ways, we've got hydropower that we're involved in. We're also involved in some of the salmon recovery work and trying to find solutions there, and really just trying to advocate for the policies that make sense for our Northwest communities and for the environment alike.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you for that little bit of background. So
Absolutely.
you work not just with us here in Chelan or our region, but how far do you operate within most of
Yeah. So
Washington?
Yeah, so our membership, I would say, the bulk of it probably falls within Washington and Oregon. So
Mhm.
that's where, the majority of our folks are. But we've also got members over in Idaho. We've got some members in Western Montana, all the way down to Wyoming. And I think at times, we've got kind of always a floating number somewhere around 100-ish. But we've had membership even I think in Nevada and Northern California at one point. I'm not sure if we've got some of those folks now, but we cover really the broader Northwest, right? So not just Washington, not just Oregon, but I guess kind of what you consider the greater Northwest region.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, this relates to our first question that Selena had. What do people think about hydropower and dams? We tend to be very positive here because that's where all of our electricity and all of our public power benefits come from. But what's the general vibe right now?
So, that is a really important question to our work actually, because the I guess you could say the vibe is positive in many ways, but it isn't trending necessarily the direction we'd like to see it go. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that we have new people moving into the state all the time and moving into the Northwest, and they're not as familiar with where we get our energy from, or they might be familiar with hydropower in other areas that's maybe not, not to put other places down, but not as great as ours, right? We've got some really awesome hydropower resources here. And so maybe they've heard some negative things or they just aren't familiar at all. But in general, the majority of folks in the Northwest do still support hydropower. And I think, particularly as we've seen all the stuff that's gone on with COVID, with the pandemic, with inflation, with heat waves and cold snaps, and all the crazy stuff that we've been going through in the last few years, you're almost starting to see now where maybe that trend is starting to cool off of people not really being too, there being kind of a group of people that aren't too thrilled about hydropower. I think more people are starting to recognize the value and also starting to understand just how important it is for us here. And so, yeah, I would say if you wanted like a real specific number, I mean, it's in this, in the 60 to 7, depending on who you poll, where you look, but it's well over 50%. So we do have a good base there.
Gotcha. And what are some of the bigger complaints about hydro that you hear?
It's interesting, you'll the biggest complaint you typically hear does involve the sort of battle over salmon recovery and the way to move forward with that. But there's also sort of this camp of folks that are, like I said, they're unfamiliar, and so when they think about hydropower, they're not really even sure that they understand what it is or how it works. And so
Mm.
they might be, when we look at our own internal polling and things like that, we might see that there's a whole subset of people that go, oh, well, the climate is changing. And that means that there's not enough water for hydropower. Or they think that, that the dams have totally like cut off rivers, or, they're not really understanding maybe how our system works. And so what we find is that as soon as you are able to just tell them about it, you don't have to have some sort of propagandistic message or anything like that. You just simply have to let them know what hydropower is, and they go, oh, I do like that, I do support it. So that
Hmm.
really is a huge bulk of the work and the load for everyone here who's trying to advocate for hydro, is just making sure that our communities know that it's there and understand how it works.
Oh, we have some supporters, by the way.
Oh, yes.
Hydropower all the way. I
Oh,
will
yeah.
say, in some posts before this, yeah, there's a lot of folks who are really positive about hydropower, particularly
Mhm.
here in Chelan County, because it benefits our county so much. But let's chat about salmon recovery.
Yes. Yes. It's a
So,
fun topic for us.
so how is it being prioritized? I mean, if you look at the history of dams, starting in
Mhm.
the 30s, for some of the dams, that was not really a big consideration in the beginning. And now, almost 100 years later, it's a really big focus. At least for Chelan PUD, we have an entire division of our our utility district that handles exclusively salmon and habitat recovery.
Right, right. No, it's a great question. It's also maybe the hardest question in the world to answer. And I don't say that because we don't have a good answer. It's simply that it's such a large thing to try and wrap our heads around, that we spend millions, not us as an organization, but as a region, we spend millions of dollars trying to figure this out. And we have scientists that are working all up and down the West Coast trying to better understand it. And I don't know that we necessarily have a grasp or an answer to everything. In
Mm.
terms of how we, I guess, as the hydropower sort of side of it, can prioritize it, I think that in many ways we've really worked hard on the mitigation efforts, whether you're looking at the hatcheries and the improvements to practices there to produce not only enough fish, but to produce better fish, and to make sure that we're creating fish that are able to survive the conditions once they leave that hatchery. We've also got some of the best fish passage really in the world, and we've kind of led the way on a lot of that.
If you want to come
Um,
see it, come to the Rocky Reach Discovery Center. They'll offer hard hat tours, and you can actually see all of the bypass, the juvenile salmon bypass that, it's like a big water slide that pops down, and then also the ladders, which you can see some really big salmon coming back up the fish ladder throughout
yes,
the
yes.
year.
Please go do that if you're listening right now. Please go do that, because that, for me, getting into this job was sort of the biggest eye-opening experience. Was once I got to go see a hatchery, once I got to go see a fish passage, a massive fish ladder at a dam over in Eastern Washington. It was like everybody needs to see this. That for me was like sort of the reason that I wanted to get into the job. Is I was like, I want the whole world to understand how this works, because I hear people joke about, the salmon can't get up the fish ladders, or they just run into the dam head first. I think we all know that kind of classic joke of what did the fish say when it got to the dam or whatever. But there's that side of it, right? There's the fish getting up the dam that we've done a really good job of doing in terms of our fish passage. But then you also look at what we've done to get the juvenile fish back down the river, and to do that in a way, because you'll hear people a lot that are concerned not only about the safety of those fish and their ability to survive that journey, but also the amount of time it takes even. And what we've seen is that we've really been able to increase that. You look at what we've done again, not we as an organization, but we as a region, in creating what you'll hear referred to as a fish weir, which is essentially a giant slide. And so this allows, because a lot of those juvenile fish tend to prefer to go over the dam, right? They don't want to go down the fish ladder, and they also don't really swim deep enough that they're typically going to go through the turbine. So for those that maybe don't understand how the dam works, you've got the water that's going to be coming in, that's going to go through the turbine and generate power, but then you're also going to have the water going over the top of the dam that's spilled. And that's spilled for a variety of reasons, whether it's to maintain water levels, whether it's to make sure that we're not generating too much power. Like I said, there's a variety of reasons for that. But those fish typically, as they're traveling downriver, take those spillways. And so by creating these weirs, it gives them sort of a safer way of doing that. I will also just kind of go on a bit of a tangent, but some people, if you go to a dam and you see the water spilling over, even with the weir, you'd be like, there's no way that tiny little fish, tiny little juvenile salmon, that can't be good for them, right? But then if you've ever watched like trout get stocked in lakes, there's some videos of like
Can't say
trout
that
being
I have.
stocked. So there's some videos out there. They actually, in especially remote places, they'll stock them using airplanes.
Oh,
And
just
like
like
they
a
will
bucket
dump
drop,
them.
like wildfire
Yeah.
style. Okay.
Yeah. And even like coming out of trucks, it's actually better. The fish tend to do better when they kind of have a bit more of an aggressive entry into the water.
Hmm.
I think it has something to do with like the oxygenation and the fact that there's some surface tension breakup going on. So, they're not just kind of being dropped off and lazily trying to find their way out. I don't know. There's a lot of science that goes into that, and that's why we have experts that do that. But the final kind of point I'll say is that we've got also now these fish-friendly turbines that are starting to be installed, because you think about a dam and people think that they're old, they're aging, they're old technology, and maybe the concrete is, but as time goes on, say a turbine reaches the end of its life and we replace it with a new one, and now they're starting to replace them with these fish-friendly turbines, which I've heard stories about ads in the 80s. I wasn't obviously around for that, but about ads, against the dams that basically had like fish in a blender or something like that, because that was the
Oh.
idea, is like they would be hitting this turbine and just getting torn to pieces. But in reality, those turbines already spin very slowly. And so it's more of the concussive force that's an issue for fish. Well, by changing the amount of blades they use and changing the shape and the design of those blades, they've now got it, I think, up to a point where it's like 99% survival. So on the off chance that a juvenile fish chooses that sort of weird route and is able to split past the screen that's supposed to keep them out of going into the turbine in the first place, there's a very high likelihood that they'll pass through there just fine. And so all of these things combined are sort of making it where we're able to help salmon, but there's a lot more to do as well. There's habitat, and there's various improvements to the management of the fishery. I think the other thing that is really important to get across is that climate change and ocean conditions affect salmon tremendously. And I understand that there can still be some politicization about the conversation around climate change or whatever, but the fact of the matter is, ocean warming and ocean conditions have played really the biggest role on salmon all across the West Coast, not just for Columbia River, not just for Washington State, but for
Mhm.
California, for Alaska. And we've really seen that, particularly in the last few years, at least since I've started the job, because when Kurt and I came in and started here at RiverPartners, and the ocean conditions were really bad and the returns were really bad. And they have now shifted to a much more favorable condition. I actually think I heard on another podcast I was listening to that in terms of the prey availability for salmon, that the last year or two has been like unbelievable. The scientists are saying that maybe there's never been a better time for salmon in terms of the amount of food that's been available to them. And in return, we've seen record numbers of spring chinook, record numbers of sockeye, and we've had some really strong fall chinook and coho runs, despite the fact that we've had really bad drought conditions.
Mhm.
We had summer days going late into October, and typically that's really hard on the fish, and we've still seen really good numbers. So for us, looking at it from the hydropower perspective, we're the biggest renewable energy resource in the Northwest, and hydropower is also so essential to those other renewables like wind and solar that, in many ways you might look at hydropower as sort of at odds with salmon, when in reality, it might be really critical in helping us sort of curb our own emissions and keep those ocean conditions more favorable for fish going into the future.
Mhm. Wow. Okay. Sounds complicated. If I'm sincere.
It is, and I'm not. I mean, I say all that as someone who still feels like I'm not even close to an expert in the subject, right? But um, salmon are this thing that's evolved over, millions of years, and they're incredibly complex. And so trying to understand what makes them tick and what's good or bad for them. I mean, we always talk about it's like you can't just flip a switch and produce a better result for salmon, because you can have a year like this year where you have really bad drought but really great ocean conditions, and those are just two of the hundreds of factors that impact them, and every population's different, even in our river systems.
Mhm.
I just anecdotally speaking, I live in the southwestern Washington area here, and the river that is right here in my hometown, um, it has completely different returns than the river that's across from us, both tributaries to the Columbia. You would think, it, by nature they'd be very similar, but what happens on the Oregon side and what happens on the Washington side can be completely different. So, trying to solve the salmon issue is so complex that it really takes a lot of people and a lot of resources to make sure that we're doing the best thing we can for these fish.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. If folks are listening and they have a follow up question for Austin, just drop it in the chat and we can answer that. We have another one, which you kind of touched on a little bit about
Mhm.
expanding renewables. So why don't we just switch to solar and wind? I mean, we've got a lot of sunshine over here, especially in Eastern Washington. We got it in spades, and we do have some wind farms down by
Mhm.
Ellensburg. There's more that are going in. Some areas have said they've put moratoriums on these things, and they're not interested in adding more. What do you say about this? What's your perspective?
So the first thing I'll say is that as a hydropower organization, we're not at all going to go and say anything bad about wind and solar, right? We're not like, oh, it's us versus them. We're all kind of on the same team, right? You could even argue that as a whole, all energy is on the same team, because we need all the resources working together in order to have the energy that we need to supply to people. But the challenges with wind and solar is the intermittency. And that's something that's not unique to the Northwest. It's something that is being discussed, I think, more mainstream now, especially as we get deeper into investing into these and implementing them. The challenges particularly arise in more extreme conditions. So if you look at some of the weather events that have happened over the last few years, like the heat waves we had and whatnot, interestingly, sometimes these happen on cloudy days. You might have
Mm.
really, really horrible heat in California, but there's actually like overcast cover. It might not look like a traditional cloudy day like we get in the Northwest where it's all gloomy and gray and everything,
Oh, it's
but
It's
there's
California overcast. It's
right, right,
different.
but there will be sort of something that's blocking
I
that
think it's
sunlight from
smog.
really getting through. Yeah, well, there
Okay.
is that too. That and wildfire smoke. Wildfire smoke can be a really big one as well, and a lot of
Yeah.
times when you have extreme heat and dry conditions, you end up with wildfires. So, there's challenges with that. It's also, for anyone that was here during the heat wave that we had, not this year, but the year before, the wind really doesn't pick up that much. You might get sort of a gust from time to time, but at least for us over here, it was stagnant. I mean, it was like being in an oven. And so those are times when those resources might not be able to pick up the load, and we have the most
Mhm.
demand that we're going to get. You have more people that need air conditioning, more people that need different sort of climate cooling solutions in order to make sure that their homes stay safe. Even just fans and whatnot.
Mhm.
And those are times when wind and solar don't necessarily always have the ability to carry the burden. It's also a question of, I think, as you mentioned as you were setting up the question, is how much of it can we really build? Because it does take a tremendous amount of land. In the
Mhm.
same way that hydropower runs into environmental issues with, say, salmon, we now have questions about, well, how does this land use affect whether it's migratory birds, whether you might hear some discussion about sage grouse, which are a lot of times in not too good shape here in the West. Um, you start building out these resources, and now you have the trouble of how many acres can we cover in solar panels before we run into an issue. Uh, Sometimes we hear the argument of like, well, why don't we just make all of our roofs solar panel? Why don't we just, you know, why don't we have like I've seen stuff about like solar road tiles and things like that, but those things haven't necessarily panned out in terms of being able to take on the load that we have, and especially as we continue to electrify, right? We're moving away from like gas heating, gas furnaces, moving away from gas appliances like stovetops and things in our homes. And we're going all electric there. And we're also looking at trying to electrify our transportation, whether that be the cars that people like you and I are driving, or the buses and garbage trucks, delivery trucks, all these different things. There's going to be a lot more demand coming down the line. And that means we need a lot more energy, and we need it to be reliable. And so, for wind and solar, then you get into the battery discussion. Well, the battery technology is not quite there yet. And so that's actually a big reason of why, as a hydropower organization, we talk a lot about wind and solar, is because in the Northwest, we've done a really good job of pairing these new solar and wind resources with hydro. And so when the wind drops down, the hydro picks up. When the solar drops down, the hydro picks up, but vice versa. If there's just a ton of wind and a ton of solar, then hydro can spill a ton of water and not produce as much. And that needs to be in perfect balance every second of every day,
That's
24
what
7,
people don't realize, right? They
365.
don't realize that when you go and turn on a light switch, there
Right.
better be electricity flowing for that to
Right.
go on.
Right.
So you
Exactly.
have to have this reserve margin, right? That you're kind of, well, we call it spinning reserves.
Mhm.
That's just waiting for you to turn on that light bulb, waiting for your hot water heater to turn on, because if you don't have that, it's instantaneous. That's why we're
Right.
talking about batteries. It's not about how much solar can you get in a day. It's how much solar can you get in this instant right now, and
Right.
how much
Right.
can you save using a battery. The answer to the saving part is very, very, very little, an
Right.
insignificant part. Yeah.
Right. And the other challenge too there is, if you look at, I, uh, not everyone has the opportunity. I've been really fortunate to have it myself, of being able to see what this looks like for, say, somebody sitting at a utility, um, you know, particularly utilities like Chelan that have their own hydropower, and looking at the job of the folks there that are operating those facilities and having to do that balancing act, because it's changing so rapidly. You think about whether it's every time somebody's flipping a light switch on or off, but particularly when you look at the input from wind. I mean, I think it goes in like 3-second intervals, if I remember correctly. It's been a few years since I was able to kind of see this in action, but it's happening up, down, up, down, up, down, and it's quite dramatic. And so the hydro, like it's, they're doing this the whole time.
Yeah, because
And
we yield to wind and solar.
right,
There's like
exactly.
there's a hierarchy, and hydropower, when wind picks up, we yield to it. We slow it down, our
Right,
generation, and then
right.
yeah, you're right. We amp it back up when it's needed. Mhm.
Exactly. So yeah, we always kind of joke. We're like, yeah, I shouldn't even say joke, but we always say like we're kind of this giant clean battery for wind and solar, right? I mean, instead of using the energy that would be stored in a battery that we don't have a battery that big for, we're using the water behind the dam as sort of that battery source. And so when we need more power, we put that water through the dam, and when we don't, we either hold it back or we spill it, depending on the conditions. So um, it's something that it's an interesting question in the sense of you'll hear claims like, oh, if we, I think I saw something from like Elon Musk or somebody that there was this viral tweet that went around that I still see posted all the time where it goes, oh, if we just covered like the state of Nevada and solar panels, we could power the whole US. And it's like, I, I mean, in
Sometimes,
theory,
maybe,
right, right. But then there's going to be those days where it's not going to work. It's
or the
just,
nights.
yeah, it's not that simple. It's just not that simple. So we
And I
need
don't
a
know if you knew
mix of
this, but there's
energy.
actual ecosystems in Nevada
Yeah,
that
yeah, oh
might
yeah.
use the sun. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. They might not be the cute and cuddly ecosystems, but there's turtles and reptiles and rabbits and little birds and things that you've probably never heard of that somebody's very passionate about. And if you start building solar panels over their habitat, you're gonna end up upsetting somebody. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's an interesting question. We're definitely going to need more wind and solar in the future. I think right now we're somewhere in like the 15 to 20% range of wind power supplying our energy in the Northwest, and then solar I think is still under 1%. So it's really
It's pretty small.
overall in our energy mix right now, it's not particularly significant, but we're going to need as much of it as we can possibly get because we're going to have, like I said, a lot more demand coming on.
Mhm. Yeah. Speaking of demand, so this is a question that we get periodically. Caleb was saying, why should we sell our power to California or other parts of the Western grid? Can't they take
Mhm.
care of themselves?
I this is always an interesting one because for us as a region, we actually do get some of their wind and solar power in return. So there is some kind of purchasing that goes on back and forth. But I think to answer the larger question, as a whole, if you look at the whole grid, right? Um, California is sort of on their own thing. We're sort of on our own thing, but the West Coast as a whole is all interconnected. In a sense, all of our grid is really interconnected. I know that some of our energy has been sold as far as New York in the past. Um, we can't afford to let California, some people, I think politically, some people might want to see California
Shut
have
it off.
blackouts, right? Be like, oh man, look at them. They had a blackout. But the problem is, if things happen to their grid, it'll impact us here too. If there was not just these rolling blackouts where they choose to shut off power, but if the power legitimately was shut off due to a shortage and you start having all these infrastructure breakdowns,
Oh, yeah. Grid
we're in
instability is
trouble too.
not ideal.
Exactly, exactly. It's like for all of us, right? We would see it from all the way from the Mexican border to the Canadian border, and
And into
it's
BC.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, we're all connected in some way or another, so we can't, from that aspect, we can't allow that to happen. It's very important that we're all working together and making sure that all of us are able to meet our needs.
Mhm.
As far as sort of also understanding the selling of power there, um, you'll sometimes hear like, oh, well, why don't we keep our hydropower here? Like, why don't we keep it? I've even had people ask, why doesn't Washington just keep the energy generated here? Why do we allow like Oregon and Idaho and these neighboring states to have it. But again, it comes back to that grid thing of, just because you have hydropower, for example, let's say Chelan, right? Just because you have dams in Chelan, well, that energy doesn't just go through the power lines in Chelan. That energy is part of that greater grid that's all interconnected. And so you can't choose, say, what home gets hydropower from Chelan PUD. You can't choose
No.
where the border is that you're going to cut it off. It's all connected through the transmission lines and power lines and all
Yeah,
the various components of the grid. So,
there's a difference between accounting, where you can
mhm,
absolutely say, okay, this power that we've, accounted for is, that's going to our homes, or this one power producer who only wants to use hydro, and the actual reality, which is electricity is just flowing throughout the grid as it needs to supply the demand. Yeah.
right. And so for that, it's like, well, aside from the why of us selling hydropower or selling power to California, of needing to make sure that everyone is able to meet their demand, it's also a matter of, in some ways, it's all this is all this is going through all the same systems. We're not choosing and picking where we're going to send certain things. It's all part of that greater grid. So
Mhm.
I think that answers the question.
So, yeah, and the other piece of this is, we hear a lot about utilities across the United States, or even into Europe now, because gas prices over there are going crazy, and so there's a lot of concern about how they're going to meet their winter needs.
Mhm,
And not all of those conversations apply to us in Chelan County. So in Chelan County, we generate a lot of hydropower. About 80% of it we sell to large power producers or to the grid, including down to California, as you mentioned. And we take all of the money that we get from that and we buy down our rates. We pay for our public power benefits. We expand our fiber optic network for internet. So the the sort of negative side of this of, oh, California, can't you take care of ourselves? Well, they're actually our kind of our clients, and we
mhm,
like them paying for our power because we take that money and we apply it to the rest of the county. So without California and these other people buying that 80% of our power, the actual cost to provide power to all of our homes in Chelan County is about double what people pay.
mhm.
So if you like paying half of your electric bill, thank California because they're
Yes,
helping out.
yes. Not only that too, but whether it's Chelan or some of the neighboring counties up there, or the greater Northwest as a whole. I mean, we have the best power rates, hands down, in the
We do.
nation.
Second
And
lowest in
so,
the country right here in Chelan.
exactly. So that, as you're mentioning, that's an important component of making sure that that continues to be the case. And people, when we talk about like dam removal issues, for example, and we talk about a 25% increase, I mean, that's massive. For the example you're providing for Chelan, I mean, if you guys doubled your rates, it'd be a nightmare, and it would be really, really, not just a nightmare of like people freaking out and being upset, but there'd be a lot of people that genuinely would be in a really painful place and trying to figure out how to make ends meet as a result of that. So it is really, really important that we're able to do that.
Yeah, actually, so there's new legislation, as you know, the Clean Energy
Mhm,
Transformation Act. It has a piece of it that's related to bill affordability for electricity. And Chelan County has, not surprisingly, even though we have a ton of electrification, so we run our heating off of electric, as well as a lot of our cooking and other things. Where other places they're using other fuel types, we're mostly all electric in Chelan.
mhm,
Even despite that, our energy burden, so people who have difficulty paying their electric bills, are some of the lowest. So other counties that we've looked at in Washington, about up to 25% of the population has bills that are deemed unaffordable based on their income.
mhm,
Ours is like, it's tiny. We're having difficulty trying to find exactly who these households are because
mhm.
there's so few, because our rates are low. So you're absolutely right. It's a thank you, California, for buying our power. We really appreciate it. You're in Chelan. All right. Are you ready for a spicy topic?
Yes, let's do
Okay. Lower Snake River dams. That is the
it.
full
Dot,
question.
dot,
Go
dot.
ahead.
Oh boy. Well, we, we're not shy to admit that we're supporters of the Lower Snake River dams. We like those dams, and we're we're gonna continue to advocate for those dams as long as it continues to make sense to do so. Um, I I will say in the last 3.5 years that I've been at the organization and we've been trying to understand this. I mean, for speaking for both Kurt and I, Kurt being our executive director and kind of, we're a two-man team here. We're a pretty small shop. Uh, we both had to ask ourselves right at the beginning when we started of, is this something that we're going to continue to get behind? Does it make sense for Northwest River Partners to, because it is controversial and there are issues, um, is this something that we can support? And it didn't take very long for us to figure out that it absolutely is something that we need to support. And it really, in many ways, has been sort of the front line for hydropower in the Northwest and sort of the battle over whether we retain it or not. But I think for us, the in 2020, to do a real quick history lesson, there's been a long battle going on over how to manage these dams and create a plan for salmon recovery around them, which has been this Columbia River Systems Operations environmental impact statement, and it's been redone many times over, I think, 2 decades now, and there's been a lot of litigation, a lot of different issues. Well, that came up again in 2020, and at the time we thought this is the big issue, right? And then the few years that have followed after, it's been just kind of one thing after another, and that leads us to this year where we had the Murray Inslee process that took place in 2022, and the question that they asked together was not should we replace the dams, it's can we replace the dams. And a lot of work went into that, and a lot of contribution was made from our side, from all of our members, from different federal agencies, and from dam removal proponents as well. And ultimately, what that process concluded with, the main takeaway line was that breaching those dams in the near term is infeasible. The recommendation, if you really read between the lines as well, there was sort of I think a bit of a split of what outcome ultimately they wanted to see. But when you really read it closely, what it is for the sake of salmon recovery, we need to pursue other near-term solutions and find other ways to help those fish. But breaching the dams is not something that we can do right now. It's not something we can afford to give up. And that power and all the other various benefits, from transportation to irrigation to, I mean, you name it, we really need those benefits, and we don't have an alternative to them. And I really think that when we look at a lot of the data, you'll see a lot of times when you discuss sort of the salmon side of it, particularly, there's a lot of modeling that goes into it. And there's also a lot of questions about how accurate those predictive models are and some of the theories behind the salmon recovery claims that are made about what would happen if we take out those dams. I think as we're studying this more and we're starting to see some of the, the actual data for, say, fish passage, or some of the data around, what are the real world impacts of removing those dams, there's a lot of questions about whether it really makes sense to do that or not. And I think there's even questions about what else needs to be done just on the Snake River, regardless of getting into, going over all the ocean issues and all of the other issues that we discussed earlier when we were talking about salmon. There's questions about what's the right strategy just for the Snake River and what we need to do there to make sure those fish have a healthy and sustainable future. But for us as an organization, we really do believe that we can retain those dams and continue to have healthy fish populations and recover the endangered fish populations moving forward. And I think that if you look at that CRSO EIS, if you look at this Murray Inslee process, those conclusions are all starting to line up as well with what we've been saying. And for us, that's a a really that's something that we're really, really happy to see, because we really do believe it here in this office. I mean, it's not something that we just do because we're, supposed to be paid to do it or something, right? I mean, we really have gone over everything that we can possibly read and spent hours sitting in here really trying to wrap our heads around this issue, and we feel very confident in the position that we've taken.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. There's no clear-cut solutions to any of these things, right?
Yeah,
Even with wind and solar, as you're talking about it, it's like everything has its positives and its drawbacks. And at the end of the day, you have to decide what does it make sense in each given moment. So, yeah, that report, if anyone's really interested, I don't know, after hearing so many years about specifically this set of dams, having that report kind of summarize all of the research around it, I thought was pretty impactful. So,
absolutely. I'm probably going to botch this, so I apologize to anyone that might be listening out there that's a fan of this quote and knows it better by heart than I do. But I recently heard it, and so it spoke to me a lot in this conversation and in the discussions that we have. And I believe it's a quote by Henry Thoreau, who said, "There's uh, essentially there's no solutions. There's just trade offs, right?"
hmm,
And there are solutions to salmon recovery. There's solutions to our energy problems, all that. But when it comes to, as you're kind of saying, um, what if we just take out all the dams and replace it all with wind and solar? Well, we don't really necessarily solve our problems for salmon or for energy, and we just create new challenges and new trade-offs, whether that's finding a place to put those new energy sources or finding a place to put the transmission lines to get those energy sources on the grid. And um, I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there who, if you're listening to this right now, probably wouldn't love to see a transmission line go up in your backyard or over your house. So, that's what we run into. There's a lot of trade-offs when you start talking about removing such a significant portion of our current energy infrastructure and trying to find a way to replace it with something else, and doing so without the confidence of knowing, is that going to solve the problem or not.
hmm,
It's kind of like a, well, we'll see, we think it might. But the model is anywhere from it might do nothing to it might do a ton, and we just don't know. So it's a
hmm.
big gamble to take.
Yeah, I will say one way to confidently know that we are not going to have to expand our energy resources for generation is to conserve the energy that we have. Just gonna put a quick plug out there. People often will call and ask about, hey, what about rooftop solar? I say, yeah, there's lots of good reasons to do solar. Is your house a lean, green, energy saving machine? Because if not, the most cost effective, the cheapest thing that you could do to generate power right now in your home is insulate your attic, switch to a heat pump, do all of the things that mean that you're using less energy. Because a penny saved is a penny earned, and a kilowatt saved is a kilowatt earned. And if you're looking to earn some kilowatts, stop using so much. And we can help you with our rebates. So this is where you'd go. It's just chelanpud.org/save, or give us a call and we can help you green up your home so that we don't have to use as much energy. And then we have more energy for other things, like selling to California for top dollar. All right,
That's great.
cool. Um, We've gotten this one a few before, but I'm really
Mhm.
curious about your perspective.
Yeah,
Kevin,
yeah.
Kevin asked about, we hear a lot about the Colorado, we hear about Lake Mead drying up, you know, not, what is it, dead pool capacity for the dams there
Mhm.
where they can't generate anything. I think
Yeah.
most all of the generating capacity they reserved last summer only for these like really extreme events. It was not like, it wasn't running 24/7 hydro. It was, if we really, 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 really have to use a little bit of water to generate electricity, we can. On the Columbia or the Snake, are there concerns about water levels like on the Colorado River?
The short answer is no. So I'll jump out with that
Cool.
right now.
Next
So
question.
yeah, yeah. If anyone wants an explanation on that, what we're seeing, and by we I mean we're we're just reading what the experts are putting out there into the world, right? The areas like Colorado, like the desert Southwest and everything, especially as things change and we see this sort of climate change happening, there is more drought predicted for those folks. There's more drought coming their way, and that does mean concerning water levels. And I think globally, even there's a question about how effective can hydropower be in drought. For our region, particularly, we're in a bit of a different position. I'm sure many people out there listening know this, but it's very wet here, right? And even on the east side of a state, it's not like being in California. There is still quite a bit of snow in wintertime and everything like that. And so when we look at sort of what the future might hold for our region and for hydropower, it might be a shift away from snowpack and from having as much of a cold winter. But there's still the prediction now is still that we're going to receive a lot of that moisture. It's just going to come in the form of rainfall.
Hmm.
So there is a bit of a challenge in how do we preserve, because right now when we have snowpack, it's up in the mountains. As we get into spring, into summer, it starts to melt, it comes down, flows through the tributaries, makes its way onto those main stems of the Columbia, the Snake, places like that, and then we generate power off of that. And that sort of delayed release of the water is what allows us to kind of easily extend generation all throughout the summer, and into the fall when we're not seeing a ton of precipitation. But the question will be making sure that if we receive that in rainfall, I mean that hits the system immediately. So now we have to find a way to store that and make sure that we have enough sort of reserved and held back that when we do get into those summer and early fall conditions and things like that, that there is moisture there. That being said, based on all those predictions, based on the capabilities of our system, we're not looking at a situation where we think at any point we're going to be really hurting for generation. We might not have as much flexibility as we've traditionally always had, but we're still going to be in pretty good shape. So there really isn't a reason to be particularly concerned about something like that. I will say on the flip side, and not to just say that all dams are great and we need all, I mean, but that as a hydropower organization, that's kind of our thing. If you look at places, I think there's some examples recently from British Columbia where they don't have dams. It's a free flowing river, and the salmon there actually really struggled this last year because of drought conditions, because there was nothing keeping water in those systems, and so they got
Hmm.
extremely low. And it's sort of an interesting thing where just the nature of having our dams there, we can ensure that maybe not for the Columbia, right? That's a huge river, but for some of those other tributaries that run throughout the Northwest, on the east side of the Cascades, having some hydropower can be really advantageous for making sure that those rivers don't end up running extremely low or running dry altogether.
Hmm.
So our hydropower system won't be affected the same way that some of these other places are, where there really are legitimate concerns.
Hmm. All right. Okay. Well, this is the last call for questions. I am getting comments from folks saying, like, thanks for talking about this. I just didn't really have hard
Mhm.
hitting questions. So thank you very much. I understand that you are starting a podcast if people want to dive a little bit deeper. Can you tell me about it?
We are in still the sort of infant stages of it. We haven't really released a lot of details about it yet, but have something very soon for folks, and we'll be putting more out soon. But
Okay.
to summarize what it's all about, we're going to be providing sort of a platform for all the experts that we talk to here at the organization. Everything that I'm saying today didn't just come from my own head, right? We've had to talk to a lot of people that are incredibly smart, that are subject matter experts, and then it gets boiled down by us to try and put out to the rest of the world. But that doesn't tell the whole story, and that doesn't tell their story either. So we're really excited. We're going to be sharing some really, really interesting things with the world from some really interesting folks, and just having sit down one-on-one conversations where we can really pick their brain and let them kind of have the floor. So I'm
Mhm.
really excited about it. I think right now, tentatively, we're looking at sort of a launch here in the new year, right, right at the beginning of the year. So we've just got to make sure that we get everything set up and working and work out all the kinks and bugs. The easiest part is talking to people, right? The easiest part's doing the interviews, having the conversations. It's actually figuring out all of the equipment, all of the software, making sure that it all works, uh,
Mhm.
and getting it out into the world. So that's what we're working on now, and hopefully we'll have that all ironed out soon, and we'll get some more episodes in the bank.
Cool, and if we wanted to know when it launches, how would we find that out?
The best way to find that out, and the best way to find out anything that we've got going on and what we're doing, is to follow us on social media. So we've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, we're also on Instagram and YouTube and LinkedIn. I would say our
TikTok? Are you coming on TikTok soon?
we might. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that
Really?
TikTok, I'm not sure that it's the right space for Northwest River Partners right now, but we'll see how that evolves here. Social media is an ever evolving thing, and it's been a very busy time in social media the last week between elections and the takeover of Twitter. So
Mhm.
yeah, I'll never say no to anything when it comes to that. But the best places to find information, particularly, would be Facebook and Twitter. That's where we're the most active, and where we can really get as much information out. You can also go to nwriverpartners.org. It's kind of a long URL, but if you've got NW and then River Partners, you've pretty much got it down. And we've got all of our information up there. We've got resources. We've got a lot of great things on that website. And you can contact us on there. So if you want to send us an email, we get all kinds of emails, some really nice ones and some really not nice ones. And you can get a hold of us there as well. And we answer pretty much all of them except for the absolutely insane spam that we get every now and then. But yeah, send us a question and we'll be right on it.
Cool. Awesome. Austin, thank you so much for taking this time out of your schedule and joining us. You actually capped off our second season. This is the final show, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate being on. We're really appreciative of Chelan as one of our members. You guys rock, and you're also hydropower producers. So what better could you ask for from our perspective than that, right? So really excited to be on here, and really excited to hopefully send off your season here with a bang.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks, Austin. Take care. I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Right. Bye.